Mason had no illusions about heroism. The trenches had taught him that quiet endurance outlasted any medal. But on that fateful dusk, beneath the flickering neon of a run-down crossroadsburg that barely registered on maps, a frightened lad named Ollie spelled out an SOS in rapid blinks across the smudge barrier of a parked vehicle's glass. And in Mason's weary heart, a defiant spark flared to life, compelling him to act. The sound his cane made against the concrete wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. It was the soft, familiar tap of someone who'd learned to walk again, slowly, deliberately, one step at a time. Mason Burke moved like that now, not because of age, though the war had added years he hadn't earned yet, but because his left knee, shattered in a blast outside Fallujah, still stiffened when the weather turned. The heat in South Carolina that day didn't help. It hung low in the air, not scorching, just heavy enough to make breath feel earned. Mason adjusted the strap on his duffel and took another step. Talp! Step! Talp! His water bottle swung loosely from his other hand, rhythmically, like a metronome counting down something unnamed. He was 2 blocks from the rehab center. Same walk he took every Tuesday and Friday. Same route, same sidewalk cracks, same faded mural on the brick wall with the American flag and the silhouette of a saluting soldier. Someone had touched up the paint recently, but time still bled through. The reds weren't as red. The blue barely held. His eyes scanned the familiar. A used bookstore closed early. A laundromat with one of its neon letters flickering like it couldn't decide whether to keep trying. Mason didn't stop. He never stopped. If he stopped, things came back. Images, sounds, heat. Not summer heat, but the kind that came from burning metal and split open ground. That kind of heat didn't fade. It just followed you home. A group of teenagers passed, laughing too loud. Mason flinched, just slightly, but enough to remind him that the old habits hadn't died. He adjusted course, veered a step toward the curb, like making space for something that wasn't there. His shirt clung to his back. Sweat traced a line down his spine, but his face stayed still. He didn't wipe his brow. He didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to, not because he was late, but because stillness had become dangerous. Stillness let things in. He reached the small intersection across from the bus stop. The sun was softening, giving way to late afternoon gold. Shadows stretched longer, dragging the day toward evening. A breeze moved through the trees, lifting a few dry leaves into motion like they were whispering to each other. Mason paused. There was no reason to. No sound. No call. Just a pause. A weight in the chest. A memory pressing in from the edges. His fingers curled slightly around the cane handle. He stared ahead, and for a second, the world narrowed. The kind of narrow that happens when you're back in the desert, crouching behind a wall, listening for footsteps that may or may not be there. Then it passed. A breath. Deep. Long. Real. He looked down at his hand, realizing his knuckles had gone white. He let go a little, shifted his weight. The cane tapped again. Keep walking, Mason. That voice wasn't outside. It lived in him now, like the sand still buried in the creases of his boots he couldn't bring himself to throw away. Like the letter from Colin's mother, still unread, still folded perfectly in the back of his closet. He crossed the street. A child's voice somewhere in the distance, soft, laughing. A dog barking twice, then silence. Wind nudging the flags that lined the fence outside the community center. He glanced up, and that's when he saw it. A woman, maybe mid-40s, was walking briskly along the opposite sidewalk. Her shirt tucked in neat, sleeves rolled just right. Her hair was pulled back tight, like she had somewhere to be and something to prove. But it wasn't her Mason noticed. It was the boy she dragged behind her. Small, thin, couldn't have been more than 6. His steps struggled to keep up, shoes too big, shirt too long. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just moved because she moved. Then, just as they passed the edge of the sidewalk, he turned his head. Their eyes met, and in that one brief second, Mason felt it again. The narrowing, the tightening, the kind of stillness that didn't warn, it screamed. The boy didn't smile, didn't cry. He just lifted his hand behind his back. 3 fingers, palm inward, a flash, then gone. The world kept moving. A car drove past. A woman on a bike passed on the opposite side. The flag still flapped lazily. Nothing changed. Nothing except everything. Mason stood frozen. The cane no longer moved. The bottle in his hand stilled mid-swing. Time stretched thin and long, like the silence before something explodes. He'd seen that signal. Once, maybe twice. In briefings. On field missions. Humanitarian extractions. 3 fingers palm inward, silent SOS. A call for help when voices can't be used, when speaking could mean punishment. Or worse, the boy was gone now, behind a white boundary wall. Novak Wordglans. No hesitation. But Mason's body had already decided. He turned. His knee screamed, but he didn't slow. Top. Step. Top. Step. Top. He didn't know what he was doing yet, or what he would do. He just knew what he'd seen, and that was enough. He wasn't chasing. Not yet, but his body moved like it remembered how. The cane tapped against the pavement, a little quicker now, the rubber tip barely keeping up with his stride. His left knee buckled slightly with the change in pace, and for a breath. Pain bit through the muscle like an old friend saying hello. He gritted his teeth. No limp would stop this. He didn't know where they'd gone exactly, just that it was behind that white wall. Just past the old iron gate near Morrison Lane. Mason had walked this neighborhood for months, but never really noticed that gate before. It sat flush with the rest of the fencing, half-rusted. Too decorative to seem functional. A place people passed without seeing. But now he saw it, and what he saw was a door that swallowed a boy who spoke without words. As Mason reached the edge of the block, he slowed, instinct maybe, something trained in years ago that told him to stop before stepping into an unknown. He pressed his hand gently against the gate. It didn't budge, not locked, but latched tight from the inside. His eyes scanned upward. A single window on the first floor closed, curtains drawn, a planter hanging beneath it, filled with fake flowers. Silk petals faded in the sun. No sound, no movement. He stood still for a long time. You're not in uniform anymore, he reminded himself. You're not in command. You're just a man with a limp and a cane and too many nights behind your eyes. But then the boy's face flashed again in his memory. Not just the gesture, not just the signal, the eyes. That look, that was what stuck to Mason's ribs like dust to sweat. He backed away slowly, walked to the edge of the alley nearby. It led to the backside of the complex. Trash bins, a patch of dried weeds, and a utility door propped open by a broom handle. Mason didn't approach. He just stood at the entrance, breathing through his nose, listening. There was a small sound, a clink of dishes maybe, the low hum of a refrigerator motor. Somewhere, faintly, the static buzz of an old radio or a television with a volume turned low. But no laughter, no child's voice. He checked the time. 5:17 p.m. People should be home. Lights should be on. Somewhere, there should be the clutter of living. But this place felt sealed, not quiet, suffocated. A flicker of movement caught his eye. The curtain in the first floor window twitched. Just once. Not enough to see through, but enough to let in or block out a glimpse. Mason squinted, raised a hand to shield the sunlight. And then, like something out of a slow dream, he saw it. A small hand, pressed gently against the glass. Not waving, not trembling, just holding the curtain's edge. It didn't move again. It didn't need to. Mason stepped back. The wind lifted, brushing his collar against his neck. The American flag at the edge of the community fence fluttered a little harder now. The air was changing. He didn't go to the door, didn't knock. He just turned around and began walking, this time with urgency, not fear. He needed a better view, and he knew exactly where to get it. His house was just a block away, tucked behind the rec center, past a row of mailboxes leaning like tired sentinels. He moved quicker now, ignoring the way his leg protested. Each step a silent beat in a rhythm he couldn't ignore. Inside, the hallway was dim. Dust hovered in the shafts of fading light. He grabbed the binoculars off the shelf by the back door, small, military-grade, lightweight. He used to take them on hikes behind base, pretending he still liked bird watching. But today, they weren't for birds. He stepped back outside, crossed the street again, and settled behind the low hedge across from the window. From here, he had a clear line of sight. He brought the binoculars to his eyes. Nothing. Then a gap. The curtain had slipped slightly. Just enough. Through it, Mason saw the same small hand, still gripping the fabric, still unmoving. It wasn't held out in curiosity. It was anchored, like the child thought if he let go. Someone would know he was watching. Mason's heart thudded once, twice, louder than it should have. He lowered the binoculars. This wasn't about hunches anymore, or gut feelings. This was about a signal and a boy and a silence that wrapped around a house too perfectly. He stood for a long time, arms at his sides, watching the window, watching the stillness. No one moved inside, but Mason felt the weight of someone watching from behind those walls, someone trying to remain unseen, and someone too afraid to be seen. He inhaled deep and slow. The air smelled like warm pavement and old pine. Familiar. Like bass. Like waiting. He turned and walked back home. This time slower. More measured. There was a storm coming. Not outside, but in him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't flinch from it. He welcomed it. The screen door creaked when he pushed it open. It always did, no matter how much oil he'd used. It was one of those old country doors that lets sound in before light. Mason stepped inside, his boots' soles making soft thuds on the faded linoleum. The kitchen was still warm from the afternoon sun that had long since shifted to the west. Dust motes floated in slow motion near the window. A ceiling fan turned lazily above, not really cooling anything, just moving air in slow circles like the thoughts he'd been trying to escape for years. He dropped the binoculars onto the table, softly, like he didn't want to wake something. For a long moment, he didn't move. Just stood there, one hand on the back of the chair, the other gripping the cane loosely. Then, in a movement so automatic it didn't need thought, he walked to the sink, turned on the cold tap, and let the water run until it turned clear. He filled a glass, drank half, set it down, watched a single drop trail from the rim to the countertop. It was quiet, not peaceful, just quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, only confirms you're alone. He stared at the refrigerator, photos of places he'd never been to, postcards from unit buddies who promised to visit but never did, a child's drawing from the neighbor's kid 2 doors down, taped at an angle, a stick figure saluting beside a flag. Underneath, the words, "Thank you, Mr. Mason." He looked away. The chair creaked under his weight as he finally sat. He leaned the cane against the table leg, and for the first time that day, let himself feel the full ache in his knee. It came sharp at first, then settled into the kind of dull throb that made men mutter in their sleep. He pulled the binoculars closer, set them beside a folded napkin and an unopened envelope that had been sitting there for a week. Something from the VA, he guessed. But he didn't touch it. Not tonight. Instead, he reached for his phone, brought up the camera feed from the dash cam on his truck, scrubbed back through the footage of that walk, past the sidewalk, past the jogger, past the mural. Then, frame by frame, he slowed at the moment the woman and the boy passed. There it was, the boy's face, and the hand, 3 fingers raised behind his back. Mason froze the frame, zoomed in. The angle was off, the light too harsh, but the hand gesture was clear. The boy's face, not so much. His features partially turned, his hair falling slightly forward, shadows hiding half the expression. Still, Mason stared at it for a long time. He tried to tell himself it wasn't proof, that it could have meant nothing, that the boy could have been playing, that the woman could be his aunt, his sister, his guardian, his anything. But none of those words sat right in Mason's gut. Because of one thing, the eyes, even in partial shadow, even blurred by motion, the boy's eyes looked directly at the camera. Not past it, not around it, into it, like he knew someone was watching, like he was hoping someone was. And then, the gesture. Not frantic, not flailing, controlled, deliberate, practiced. Mason exhaled slowly, leaning back in a chair. His fingers ran through his hair, stopping briefly at the temple where a scar pulsed lightly with the memory of shrapnel. He thought of other children, not here, far away, in desert towns with no names that stuck. Children he couldn't reach in time. Children hidden behind makeshift curtains, waiting too long for someone who never came. And then he thought of that boy, this boy, who had found a way to speak without sound. He picked up his phone again, swiped through to a different app, one used only by veterans with clearance, an internal residential directory for military housing and temporary residence programs. He entered the address. The system loaded slowly, the wheel spinning longer than it should. The kitchen buzzed faintly under the pressure of old wiring and slow Wi-Fi. Finally, it loaded. Miriam Dean, age, 44, occupation, private educator. Length of residency, 7 months. Co-residence, none. No child listed. No dependents. No temporary custody forms. No enrollment with local schools. No pediatric records attached to her ID. Nothing. Mason didn't move. His eyes scanned the data again. It could be an oversight, a clerical error, a private arrangement. Sure, but deep down, in that old place between instinct and experience, Mason knew better. His hand went to the envelope again, hovered, then dropped back to the table. He stood, crossed to the hallway, opened the closet door with the old coats and boxes that still smelled like military soap and desert, pulled out the box labeled Recon Gear, Light Use. Inside, a pair of compact binoculars, a map book, a flashlight, and a compact recording device. Still functioning, still charged, still waiting. Mason took the recorder, set it on the table, and sat back down. Outside, the sun had dipped behind the hills. The room grew dimmer, but he didn't turn on the light. He didn't need to. Some things are clearer in the dark. Morning came without fanfare. The sky turned from charcoal to gray, then to that washed-out blue that never really wakes you. Mason had barely slept. The coffee was bitter, thin, and he didn't bother changing out of his shirt he'd worn the day before. It was crumpled at the sleeves, still smelled faintly of dust and something else he couldn't name. He sat at his kitchen table again, same chair, same light angle through the window, and stared at his laptop. The login screen blinked. His password, still remembered. The same internal portal. Same system. But this time he dug deeper. He didn't go in like a man looking for answers. He went in like a man needing confirmation of what he already feared. He searched the name, Miriam Dean. Her credentials were clean. No flux. No prior violations. Lived in 3 different states over the past 5 years. All legal. All boring. Too boring. He scrolled to the residency record. Morrison Lane, Unit 17. That matched. But then he went to the cohabitation field. Empty. No minors. No listed dependents. No foster forms. No shared guardianship applications. Mason's jaw tensed. He checked the education database, cross-referencing addresses and names with local school enrollments. No child from Unit 17 enrolled anywhere in the district. Not public, not private. No homeschooling affidavit filed. He moved on to health records. Still nothing. No pediatrician visits tied to that address. No insurance coverage for a minor. No admissions. No vaccinations. It was a ghost trail. He leaned back in his chair. The screen cast a pale blue wash over his face. It flickered slightly, as if even the system knew something wasn't right. He typed again. A different angle. He searched for local missing children last 3 years. Cross-checked their profiles against facial features, birthmarks, even hair color. Nothing matched. But he wasn't discouraged, because deep down, Mason didn't believe the boy was in any system. Not anymore. The worst monsters didn't operate in darkness. They operated in plain sight, under the name of normal. He stood, moved to the counter, poured a second cup. Hands steady, movement slow. The world outside his window was waking, buses passing, dogs barking, lawn sprinklers kicking up morning mist. But here, in this small, outdated kitchen, time didn't move forward. It looped. Memories bled in like ink in water. He thought of the village girl outside Mosul. 8 years old, silent, always clutched the hem of her tunic with one hand. She had watched Mason's unit approach, but never ran, never waved. She just stood there, her eyes begging someone to recognize what she couldn't say. 2 weeks later, they found her brother, locked inside a grain shed behind a trusted household. He had used a signal too, a scarf tied the wrong way. A single gesture. They almost missed it. Mason stared at his screen again. The digital emptiness glared back at him like a mirror. The boy wasn't listed anywhere because someone didn't want him to be. Not forgotten, erased. He pulled up the visual from yesterday, still saved on his dashcam footage. He scrubbed to the exact frame again. Paused it. There he was. The boy's name might be unknown, but his presence was undeniable. Mason took a screenshot, opened a side window, dragged in the image, increased the contrast, zoomed on the collar. There, a faint, nearly invisible thread pattern. Letters. OG. Initials? A name? A leftover from a time when someone still knew who he really was? Mason didn't know yet, but he knew enough to feel the thread of certainty tightening in his chest. This boy didn't just accidentally fall through the cracks. He was pushed. He saved the file, labeled it simply, boy, signal, unconfirmed. Then he opened a clean document. He started writing, not like a report, but like a ledger, line by line, observation by observation. He didn't try to sound formal. He wrote what he saw. Male child, EST age 5 to 6. Slim build. Wearing oversized shirt, initials OG on collar tag. Accompanied by female adult, Miriam Dean, 44. Brisk Bache. Boy turned and flashed 3-finger distress signal, palm inward. Recognized in military rescue protocol. No matching records for co-residency. No school. No medical. Child not listed. Child not acknowledged. Child may be in danger. He paused. Read it back. Each sentence a beat. Each line a quiet accusation. Then he added, "Child looked at me like he knew what he was doing. He didn't flinch. He asked for help. And now I know." Mason saved the document, closed the laptop, sat still. The wind outside had picked up. The flag across the street snapped against its pole, no longer lazy. He looked around his kitchen. The cluttered fridge, the second cup of coffee, the drawer that stuck when pulled too fast. Everything was the same, and yet everything had shifted. He reached down and picked up the recording device from the night before, turned it over in his hands. It was light, barely weighed anything, but it carried a truth heavy enough to break the silence. Mason didn't go back to the house immediately. He waited until the afternoon, when the shadows stretched longer and the sun slid lower in the sky, the way it did when you knew evening was coming, but no one was ready to turn the lights on yet. He parked 3 houses down, same side of the street as yesterday. The truck engine ticked quietly as it cooled. He didn't rush, just sat in the driver's seat, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other on his thigh. Across the road, Morrison Lane's Unit 17 looked like every other house in the cul-de-sac. White brick, trimmed hedges, red door. A plastic tricycle lay on its side by the porch, too clean to have been used. A wind chime tinkled somewhere off-screen, the sound too delicate for the tension pressing into Mason's chest. He waited 5 minutes, 10, then he saw it. A curtain on the first floor shifted slightly, like someone peeking but not enough to be seen. Mason raised the binoculars, and there he was. The same boy, same small frame, same shirt with sleeves hanging over the wrists. He was standing half behind the curtain, only his upper body visible. One hand clutched the fabric like it was the only thing tethering him to the world beyond that window. He wasn't playing. He wasn't curious. He was watching. Not the way children watch cars or birds or squirrels. No trace of innocence in that gaze. It was sharp, still, too still. The boy didn't blink for a long time. And then, slowly, his head turned. Just slightly. Not enough to look at the street. Just enough to glance over his shoulder, as if listening for footsteps behind him. Mason's stomach clenched. That wasn't the look of a child in trouble. It was the look of a child who had learned not to make trouble. A hand came down. Not his. The curtain fell back into place. Gone. Mason lowered the binoculars. He stared at the house for several seconds, but no other movement came. No television glow. No music. No thump of running feet. Just that empty kind of silence that clings to places hiding too much. He got out of the truck. Not quickly. Not quietly. Just intentionally. Every step felt measured. Not because he was being watched, though he knew he was, but because this was familiar ground. Not the house. Not the street. The feeling. He'd felt it in war zones. In villages with friendly smiles and locked doors. In compounds where children whispered behind walls. Too scared to speak out loud. Places where the silence was orchestrated, note for note, by someone who needed to stay in control. He walked past the house once. Then again. He didn't look directly at the windows. He just passed, eyes straight, like any man getting steps in before dinner. But on the second pass, he saw it again. Just a flicker, barely more than movement. This time, not the curtain. The corner of a piece of paper. White. Folded. Tucked into the gap at the bottom of the window frame. Almost invisible unless you knew to look. He kept walking. 30 more feet. Turned around. Came back. As he passed the house again, he slowed. Not to a stop. Not enough to draw attention. But just enough to lean slightly toward the hedgerow. He reached down like fixing a shoelace. And in one clean movement, he grabbed the folded paper. Slipped it into his jacket pocket. Kept walking. Didn't look back. Didn't blink. He turned the corner. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and throat. Back in the truck, he sat a long moment before unfolding the page. There were no words. Just a crude drawing done in blue ink. A small figure. Stick arms. A square for a house. A tall person beside the small one. The larger figure had sharp lines for eyebrows, mouth turned down. The child's arms reached out, but the hands weren't drawn. Just empty circles. One of them had 3 fingers. That was it. No name. No that did. Just a message delivered the only way it could be. Mason folded the paper carefully. Placed it inside the glove box like something fragile. Sacred. His fingers rested on the latch a second longer than needed. That night, he didn't turn on the TV. He didn't cook dinner. He didn't touch the unopened VA letter. He sat by the window, lights off, watching the street. Watching for curtains that shifted. Watching for a silhouette to appear. Watching for any sign that someone inside that house might be trying to say more. The moon rose slow and silver. The wind died, and the boy did not come back to the window. But Mason didn't leave. He waited, because now he knew two things. The boy was real, and the boy knew how to ask for help. That was enough. For tonight, the folded drawing still sat in his glove compartment the next morning. He didn't touch it, didn't unfold it again. He didn't need to. The image had already burned itself into his memory. The small figure with 3 fingers, the blank face, the square house too big for such a small child. Some messages didn't need repeating. He stood in the kitchen, toast untouched on his plate, the coffee already lukewarm. The same ceiling fan spun overhead. Same windows. Same sounds outside. The slow rhythm of a town pretending everything was fine. He turned toward the hallway and disappeared into the back room. This one wasn't a bedroom. It was more a holdover, a space wherein used things went to sit and be forgotten. Old uniforms hung still in garment bags. A steel filing cabinet, dented from a move years ago, sat against the wall. And in the corner, an old desktop monitor hummed faintly, like it hadn't been shut off properly in days. Mason sat down and tapped the spacebar. The screen flickered to life. His fingers moved across the keyboard, slow at first, then faster as muscle memory kicked in. It had been years since he accessed the National Missing Persons database through the Veteran Secure login, but the password still worked. He exhaled, opened the portal, typed, male, age estimate, 5 to 7, last seen, unknown, region, southeastern U.S. Then he paused. He added, hair brown, eyes, gray or blue. The system loaded. Oh, Will Spoon. The numbers ticked upward. 76 cases. He adjusted the filter, trimmed the range, narrowed it to the last 3 years. Now 43. He leaned forward. Click, click, click. One by one, each profile blinked onto the screen. Some with full details, some barely more than names, and a single photo. Photos where the children were smiling, unaware that a camera had captured the last day their life would look normal. Mason clicked through, face by face, letting instinct guide his eye. He stopped at number 18. The boy in the photo had softer cheeks, shorter hair, but there was something in the shape of the mouth, closed tight, and the eyes, not scared exactly, just aware. He clicked the file open. Name, Oliver Grant. Age at time of disappearance. 4. Date missing, April 18th, 2 years ago. Location, Monroe Park, MN. Circumstances, last seen with non-custodial adult. No confirmed witness. No camera footage. Case marked stalled after 10 months. He leaned back in his chair. Grant. OG. The initials stitched on the boy's collar. He stood suddenly, too fast. His knee locked, a bolt of pain shooting through him. He didn't wince. Just leaned against the doorframe and waited for it to pass. His heart was beating too hard. Not from adrenaline. From something deeper. Recognition. He turned and grabbed his phone. Found the screenshot from his dash cam. Zoomed in again on the boy's profile. He opened the database photo of Oliver Grant beside it. Different lighting, different age, but the nose slightly off-center, the right eyebrow with a subtle arch, and behind the right ear, faint but visible even in the old image. A birthmark. He checked the case notes. Identifying mark. Faint crescent-shaped birthmark behind right ear. Mason sat again. He didn't need a match. He didn't need DNA yet. He knew. It was in his gut. The same place that had told him to duck behind a wall seconds before a mortar hit. The same place that whispered when someone was lying. Oliver Grant had not vanished. He had been taken. And now he was here, living behind a window, drawing with a pen, waiting for someone to notice. Mason opened a new document. He wrote only one sentence. I think I found him. Then, hesitating just for a breath, he added a second. This time, we don't turn the page and move on. That afternoon, he stood on his porch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the end of the street. The air was quiet again, not soft, hollow, like the sound had been drained from it. He watched a delivery truck roll past. A dog barked somewhere out of sight, but no children played. No footsteps approached from Unit 17. He pulled out his phone again, looked once more at the photo of Oliver Grant, the old one, then at the still from yesterday, the boy through the curtain. He layered the two images side by side, and slowly, line by line, a match appeared. He whispered the name, not to the wind, not to the house across the street, but to himself. A name no one had spoken out loud in too long. Oliver. And in that moment, Mason knew, deep in marrow and memory, that what had started as a flicker was now a fire. The system may have stopped searching, but he hadn't. Mason waited until after sunset. There's a certain honesty that comes with calling someone in the evening. You don't pretend it's business. You don't pretend you're not interrupting something. You just admit, in the sound of the phone ringing, that what you're about to say is going to matter. He sat in the dark. The only light coming from the hallway, where Murphy lay sprawled across the floor, his ears flicking at the refrigerator's occasional groan. Mason scrolled through the missing persons database until he found it again, Oliver Grant. Underneath the basic file was a single contact number listed as the reporting guardian. It hadn't been updated in over a year, but was still there. Claire Grant, mother. He clicked the number. Let it ring. Once. Twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. Soft. Breathless. Hello. He hadn't planned the words. Still they came. Mrs. Grant. A pause. Not long, but not short either. Yes. My name's Mason Rourke. I'm a retired Army Staff Sergeant. I live down in Whiteford, South Carolina. Another pause. Longer this time. He imagined her standing in a kitchen, hand on the counter, eyes fixed on something that wasn't moving. I'm sorry to call like this, he continued, but I believe I've seen your son. Silence. Not the kind that comes with disbelief. The kind that comes when something fragile begins to unfold inside you, and you don't trust it yet. I found an old photo, he said. Online. I think he's here. In my neighborhood. She didn't respond. He waited. He counted 10 seconds. Then 15. And then she spoke. Are you sure? Her voice cracked on the last word. Mason closed his eyes. No, not completely. But there's signs. What kind of signs? He hesitated. He left something for me. A drawing. There's a mark behind the right ear. I saw it, even in the old photo. Crescent-shaped. It matches. He heard the sound of her hand covering the phone. A muffled sound, like breathing into a pillow. Like pain being pressed back down after it surged too fast. I need to ask, she said finally. What condition? What does he look like? Mason's voice lowered, unconsciously. Small. Too thin. He doesn't smile. I've only seen him twice. But he doesn't act like a child who's free. Claire didn't speak. He didn't push. Sometimes the kindest thing you can give someone is silence enough to fall apart in. When she did speak again, her voice was steadier. The last person who called me said they were with a private agency, that they traced Oliver to a shelter in Arizona. They were wrong. Mason nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'm not a detective, ma'am. I'm just a guy who saw something that didn't feel right. And you're sure it's him? No, but I'm sure that boy needs someone to be. A breath caught. It was hers. Then, what do you want me to do? Mason leaned forward, elbows on knees. Just talk to me. Tell me something only he would know. A detail, a phrase, anything, something I can use. There was a pause. Then, when Oliver was 3, he used to call our neighbor's dog Button, even though her name was Rosie. He thought all dogs should be named after things you could push. Mason smiled, just barely. Got it. He's left-handed, she continued, and he never liked loud music, used to cover his ears during cartoons. She stopped, then added, he hums when he draws. Not songs, just hums. Like he's making up the music as he goes. Mason felt something stir in his chest. Not certainty, but closeness. Like the pieces of a puzzle shifting closer together, even if they didn't click yet. I'll keep watching, he said. I won't do anything reckless. I've heard that before, she replied. But she didn't hang up. They sat in the quiet together. She finally asked, do you believe in instinct, Sergeant Rourke? He thought for a moment. Only when it refuses to shut up. She exhaled, long and slow. Then, if you're right, if that really is my son, then please don't let him disappear again. Not even one more day. Mason nodded. I won't. And this time, it wasn't a promise. It was a choice. It started with coffee in a paper cup. Not the kind he made at home. Too bitter, half forgotten in the pot. This was the gas station kind. The kind that said, you're not staying long. You're not here to be comfortable. Mason parked 2 houses down. From where he sat, Unit 17 looked like any other duplex on Sycamore Lane. Beige siding. A cracked sidewalk leading up to a porch with 2 plastic chairs. The yard was bare. Not unkempt, just unremarkable. No toys. No bike. No signs that a child lived there. That was the first thing that made his stomach tighten. Children leave traces, even the quiet ones. He raised the disposable cup, sipped, burnt, let the heat settle in his chest. The man who lived there had a name, Leon Hargrove. According to the property records Mason pulled that morning. Mid-40s. Worked part-time as a home appliance repairman. No prior criminal record. No spouse listed. No children registered in school. Just a man. Alone. On paper. But Ollie had drawn something. and that changed the paper. The curtains on the left window were shut, but not tight. A sliver of interior could be seen if the light inside shifted just right. Yesterday, that was where Mason had seen the child, half hidden, peering. He checked his watch. 6:38 a.m. Too early for most. But he knew from 2 mornings of silent observation that Leon left for work at 7:12. Like clockwork. So Mason waited. A mail truck passed, coughing. Murphy shifted in the passenger seat. Tail thudding once, then settling again. Across the street, a porch light flicked on, then off. At 7:09, the front door of Unit 17 opened. Leon stepped out, gray jacket zipped, toolbox in one hand. He locked the door behind him, checked it twice, then walked to the faded blue sedan. It choked to life, then pulled away without fanfare. Mason counted to 30, then got out. He didn't cross the yard. Not yet. He walked past the house, slowly, as if taking his morning stroll, though he hadn't done that in years. From this angle, he could see the side windows. Closed. One screen slightly warped at the edge. The grass along the side path was trampled. Not much, but enough to suggest someone used it frequently. He passed the driveway, stopped by the mailbox. Then he heard it. A small sound. Not a voice. Not a cry. A shuffle, like a chair leg dragged against linoleum. He turned his head slowly. The curtain in the front window moved. Just an inch. Then stopped. Mason stood there. Not threatening. Not eager. Just present. And for a breath, he saw it. A shape. Small, quick, retreating. A child. There, then gone. He kept walking. Didn't speed up. Didn't look back. It wasn't time. Not yet. That night, he sat in his truck again, parked under the same streetlight. The cup holder now home to an empty thermos and a notebook filled with nearly identical entries. 6:38 a.m., Leon exits. 7:12 a.m., car departs. 8:10 a.m., no activity. 12:27 p.m., curtain shift, possible visual confirmation. 3:01 p.m., dog bark, intermittent, not from 17. 6:43 p.m., porch light flicked on, no exit. 8:19 p.m., shadow behind front curtain. Small. Still. It was like building a case from ghosts. Everything was half seen, half heard, but none of it felt imagined. At 10:17 p.m., he wrote 2 more lines. No sign of other adults. Kid is still there. He closed the book, sat in the silence. Across the street, a light flicked on in the hallway of Unit 17. Just for a second, then off again. He imagined the child in there, Ollie, standing barefoot on tile, listening for something he couldn't name, trying to understand what was real, what was safe. Mason understood that kind of listening. It was how you survived in war zones, and sometimes how you survived home. The next day, Mason returned, not to watch, but to listen. He parked in the same spot, same time. This time, he carried something with him, a small parabolic microphone, left over from a short-lived attempt to record birdsong during his first year out of the Army. He tuned it carefully, aimed it toward the left side wall. Crackles. Silence. Then, a sound. A voice. Male. Deep. Slow. Not shouting. Dictating. Mason turned up the gain. You don't talk until I say. Understand. Silence. Then a smaller voice. I wasn't. The first voice again, more clipped now. Enough. You already broke the rule yesterday. Sit down. Silence again. Mason hit record. His fingers trembled just slightly. The next 20 seconds were blank. Then came a whisper. Not from the man, but the child. A single sentence. I miss my mom. Then a thump. Chair leg? Hand on table? Mason couldn't tell. But what came next chilled him. The man's voice again, but altered. Like a different person entirely. Higher. Mocking. She's not coming. Moms don't love boys who don't obey. Mason's knuckles whitened around the recorder. He stopped the tape. Sat back. Breathed. The child had a voice. And now, so did the house. The rain came in thin strands, early and undecided. Not the kind that made you run. The kind that made you stop. The kind that felt more like memory than weather. Mason stood beside his truck. Hood pulled low, notebook damp in his coat pocket. Murphy stayed curled up in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the fogged-up glass. Across the street, Unit 17 remained still. The porch light had flickered once at dawn, then gone dark again. He hadn't slept. Not really. The audio recorder was tucked in his shirt pocket, still warm from the charge, still holding that voice. She's not coming. Moms don't love boys who don't obey. He had replayed it in his head more than once. Not the words, but the tone, like someone smiling while twisting a knife. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Mason wasn't a cop. He had no warrant. Nobody. Just instinct and the ache in his gut that told him time was thinning. He checked his watch. 7:14 a.m. Leon had already left. No sign of the boy. The rain dripped from the edge of his cap. He stepped back into the truck, closed the door with a softness learned from a decade of nights in places you weren't supposed to be. The kind of door closed that said, "I was never here." Murphy shifted and yawned, leaning against his leg. Mason let his hand rest on the dog's head, silent. He looked at the house again. There was something about the stillness of it, how it didn't move with the day. No music, no movement, no shadow play behind curtains. Like time forgot it, and maybe that's what Leon wanted. To be forgotten, or to hide something no one remembered to look for. At 10:03 a.m., the rain steadied. He saw it from the corner of his eye. A shift, in the far right window this time. A shape, slighter than before. Mason raised the binoculars. The window was cracked open, barely, and then barely visible a hand. Small, palm pressed to the glass. Not waving, not signaling, just pressing. He lowered the binoculars slowly. Murphy's ears twitched. Mason didn't speak. He didn't write it down. He simply memorized it. That hand, that rain, that silence. At 2:47 p.m., the street emptied. Children returned from school, buses hissing to a stop, but none of them belonged to Unit 17. A woman passed with a stroller, glanced at the house, didn't linger. Nobody looked at that house twice. Mason rolled down the window. The rain was light again, steady, rhythmic. He stared at the sidewalk in front of the door, and that's when he saw it. Chalk, a faint line, drawn just inside the curve of the step. He opened the truck door, walked casually across the street, as if passing through. The chalk mark was smudged, but deliberate. A circle, then a small line inside it. Like a dot, like an eye. He glanced up. No curtain movement. He kept walking, but his heart thudded once hard. That wasn't the mark of a child drawing randomly. That was message. Someone had reached out. Someone wanted to be found. That night, Mason sat with Claire on the phone again. She didn't cry this time. She listened. "I heard him," Mason said. Voice low. Recorded it. Not long. But it's there. What did he say? That he missed you. That someone told him you weren't coming. The silence on the other end stretched. "I called CPS twice." Mason added. "No one's responded. They're overloaded." "I can fly there," Claire said. "I could be on a flight tomorrow." Mason didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window again. The chalk was gone now, rinsed by rain. "Wait," he said. "Not yet. I need 2 more days. I'll get the rest. I'll make sure it's him." Claire's voice came quieter. "You're doing more than anyone's ever done." Mason didn't know what to do with that. He'd saved men in war, carried wounded across minefields, shielded bodies with his own. But this was different. You couldn't shoot ghosts. You couldn't rescue a child with rage. You had to be still, patient, steady, like a stone in water, waiting for ripples to come back. At 3:19 a.m., Mason sat bolt upright. Murphy growled. Outside, the rain was heavier. And then a knock, not on the truck, but far off. Mason rolled down the window, listened. Again knock, rhythmic. From the house, from a side door. He grabbed the recorder, pressed play, set it to capture, stepped out, slowly. The sidewalk gleamed. The knock stopped. Then a soft voice. "Mister?" Mason turned toward the voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't panicked. Just there. Real. Ollie. He stood in the space between house and shadow. Soaked through, shirt stuck to ribs, knees scraped. Barefoot on concrete. Mason didn't move. Didn't speak. The boy looked up. "I left the chalk," he whispered. "You saw it." Mason nodded, slowly. Ollie looked over his shoulder. "I can't stay long." Mason dropped to one knee. "Are you hurt?" The boy hesitated, then lifted his arm. A thin red line ran up the inside of his elbow. Mason's throat tightened. Ollie whispered. "He sleeps like a log on Wednesdays." Mason swallowed. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we'll fix this." And for the first time, Ollie nodded. Not fast, not dramatic, just certain. The boy had slipped back through the side gate before Mason could say another word. Not out of fear, not in panic, just timed, like he knew how long the shadows would protect him. The door had shut with a whisper, and after that, nothing but rain again. Mason remained crouched beside the truck for several seconds, eyes locked on the sliver of backyard, now lost in blackness. Murphy didn't bark. He just watched, like he understood something had changed. Something had opened. The rest of the night was waiting. A quiet, clenched kind of waiting. Inside the truck. Mason rewound the tape from the recorder and pressed play. The boy's whisper still echoed there. You saw it? And later, the line that unsettled him most. He sleeps like a log on Wednesdays. It wasn't just a fact. It was an invitation. A plea. A window. He stared out at Unit 17. The house didn't move. It never did. But in that stillness now lived a map. A whisper of pattern. A thread. And Mason had spent enough of his life following threads through dust and ruin to know. When a thread pulls, you follow. At 2:03 a.m., the rain slowed to a mist. Mason stepped out of the truck. No sudden movements. No flashlights. He left Murphy behind. He wore gloves. Not for stealth. For memory. His boots pressed gently against wet earth. He didn't approach the front door. That was for people with keys, with reasons. He took a side path. The one with the trampled grass. The one Ollie had appeared from. Each step came with breath. Each breath with a voice in his head saying, "You could be wrong." He stopped beside the sidewall. A small utility vent gaped near the base of the house. The same vent where, weeks ago, a raccoon had once nested. Mason knelt, placed the mic near the vent, adjusted the gain, pressed record. He didn't expect much. Maybe the sound of a heater. Maybe pipes. Instead, he heard movement. Not loud, not clumsy, just pacing. Feet over hardwood, back and forth. Then a voice. Leon's. Unmistakable. No, you don't get to ask that. I already said. A pause. Then again. What did I tell you about doubt, huh? What did I tell you? Silence. Then something softer. Another voice? No, the same voice, but changed. Softer, like someone mimicking a child. No, please. I didn't mean to. I just wanted. The voice snapped back. You always want. You always want. Shut up. Mason blinked. The voice was talking to itself. And then it laughed. Quiet. Broken. Like a swing that hadn't been greased in years. He kept recording. 15 minutes. No movement outside the house. Just that voice. Shifting. Arguing. Mocking. Pleading. Over and over. At one point it sang. Out of tune. A lullaby twisted through clenched teeth. Then came a sound Mason didn't expect. Dragging. Like furniture. Heavy. Against wood. Then metallic click. A latch. Then footsteps. Down. Basement. He scribbled in the dark. 2:29 a.m. Voice shift. Possible multiple personalities. Basement entry. He waited. The rain stopped. In the stillness. A dog barked blocks away. Then quiet again. 3:07 a.m. A new sound. Thud. Then again. A soft whimper. Child. Mason's hand tightened around the mic. Then Leon's voice, rough now lower. Say it. Say it loud. Ollie's voice. I'm sorry. Again, Leon, what for? Pause. I tried to remember the song. Another pause. Then silence. Then what Mason feared. The slap. Sharp. Hollow. Not a strike of fury. A strike of ritual. Mason yanked the mic back. Press stop. Heart hammering. He had what he needed. Not proof for a court. Maybe, but enough. Enough to act. He slid the recorder into the inside pocket of his coat and turned to leave. But then, a creak. Behind him, a motion light flared on above the garage. He froze. No one stepped out. No door opened. But Mason felt it. Watched. Like something inside the house had blinked and remembered it had eyes. He took one step back, slow. Another. Made it to the sidewalk. Back to the truck. Murphy sat up. Whined once. Mason opened the door. Slipped in. Closed it quietly. His hand was shaking now. Not from fear. From decision. Tomorrow would not be about recording. Tomorrow he would knock. Not as a soldier. Not as a cop. As someone who couldn't look away anymore. He pressed his forehead to the steering wheel. Ollie's voice still in his ears. I try to remember the song. He whispered, I remember it too, kid. Outside, the wind shifted. The house across the street waited. But Mason no longer did. The sun broke through slow and pale. Like someone unsure of their welcome. Morning in these parts was quiet in the way old wounds quiet. Never gone, just waiting for a shift in the weather to ache again. Mason sat with both hands on the wheel. Truck still parked across from Unit 17. Murphy lay curled in the passenger seat, breathing slow, warm against the fogged window. The voice recorder was still in Mason's coat. He hadn't played it back. Didn't need to. Some things, once heard, etched themselves in bone. He watched the house. The curtains remained drawn. The mailbox held no new letters. The porch mat, soaked from last night's rain, sagged in one corner like it had given up waiting for footsteps. And still, something inside whispered, today. Not because he was ready, but because Ollie might not get another Wednesday. At 7:48 a.m., Mason stepped out of the truck. No yakit. No these guys. No silent approach. He walked to the door like a man, returning something that was never his. The porch creaked beneath his boots. He knocked. 3 times. Not loud. Not soft. Just enough. No reply. He waited. Knocked again. From within, a sound, slow footsteps, then a hesitation. The door cracked open an inch. Leon. Same tired eyes. Same polite smile pulled too tight. Mornin', Mason said. Leon blinked. Back again. Mason nodded. Had a few questions. Thought I'd ask face to face. Leon glanced behind him. Boy's still asleep. That's all right, Mason said. I'm not here to wake him. Silence stretched. Then Leon stepped aside. You a social worker now? No, Mason said, crossing the threshold. Just someone who saw something. The house was dim. Smelled of overboiled pasta and old newspaper. Walls yellowing at the corners. No pictures. Just a single cross above the doorway. Hung slightly askew. Leon led him to the kitchen. Coffee? Mason shook his head. Just the truth if you've got any. Leon chuckled, dry and slow. Truth's not cheap these days. Mason didn't laugh. He sat at the table. Leon stayed standing. You ever lose a kid? Leon asked suddenly, voice thin. Mason didn't answer. You ever have to raise one that wasn't yours? Still no answer. Leon tilted his head. Then don't judge too fast. You don't know what it's like trying to fix something that came to you already broken. Mason's voice was even. Ollie's not broken. Leon's jaw tightened. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps above. Muffled. Familiar. Mason glanced upward, listening. Leon followed his eyes. He sleepwalks sometimes, he said. Mason didn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward slow. Tell me about the basement. Leon blinked. There's no basement, he replied, too quickly. Mason's hand rested on the table. I heard a latch, he said quietly, and dragging, and a voice talking to itself. Shifting tones. Pleading. Leon's smile vanished. You bug my house. No, Mason said. I listened. There's a difference. For the first time, Leon looked small. Not weak. Not defeated. Just exposed. Like a man caught halfway between masks. Then a sound. Soft. Bare feet. Turning. Both men looked to the hallway. Ollie stood there. Thin. Shirt wrinkled. Knees bruised. Holding something in both hands. A piece of folded paper. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stared at Mason. Leon cleared his throat. Ollie, go back upstairs. But Ollie didn't. He walked slowly toward Mason. Held out the paper. Hands trembling, but steady. Mason took it. Unfolded it. A drawing. Pencil lines, rough but clear. A man with a square jaw. A dog beside him. A boy with a balloon. 3 figures. Holding hands. At the bottom, a scrawl. Come back when it's safe. Mason looked up. Ollie was watching him. Not pleading. Not afraid. Just hoping. Leon stepped forward. I said go upstairs. And that's when Mason stood. Full height. Between the boy and the man. Not a soldier. Not a savior. Just a presence. I think it's time someone else saw what's down there, he said. Leon didn't move. Didn't fight. He just deflated. Keys are in the drawer. He muttered, turning away. Mason opened the drawer. Pulled out a ring with 2 brass keys. He turned to Ollie. You want to show me? Ollie hesitated. Then nodded. Small. Sure. Mason followed him to the hallway. A door half hidden behind a stack of crates. He inserted the key. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. A stairwell, steep and dark, descended into quiet. Mason clicked on the small flashlight he kept on his belt. Not a beam, just a glow. He looked down, then back at Ollie. You don't have to, but the boy stepped beside him. I want to, he whispered. And so they walked, together, into whatever truth waited beneath. Not running, not hiding, just walking, as the house exhaled behind them. And above, the rain began again. The stairs creaked under their weight. Not from age, but from memory. Each step downward was a quiet unraveling. Ollie walked just ahead of Mason, his hand brushing the wall, as if to steady more than just his footing. The boy didn't speak. He didn't need to. His body told its own story. Stiff shoulders, a hesitation in each step. The way his heels never fully touched the wood, as if he feared waking something below. Mason followed with careful eyes. Not protective, not yet. Just present. They reached the bottom. A narrow corridor opened up, lit only by the flashlight in Mason's palm. A thin beam that carved slow paths along dust-lined concrete walls. To the left, shelves with boxes labeled in smudged Sharpie. Tax, winter, church, mom. To the right, a narrow doorway. Unmarked. Ollie paused there. This way, he whispered barely above breath. Mason nodded. The boy reached for the handle. It didn't stick. It didn't groan. It opened like it had been used too many times for surprise. Inside, the space widened. A room with no windows. No carpets. Just concrete floor. And a single bulb hanging overhead, unlit. The smell of mildew and old breath. In the center, a mattress, thin, child-sized. Beside it, a chair. Wooden, straight-backed. A crack across the seat. Toys lined the wall, but not playfully. Not scattered or mid-game. Arranged. Precise. Like props in a play someone kept rehearsing, but never wanted to perform. A stuffed bear sat facing the wall. One eye missing. Mason's throat tightened. He didn't look at Ollie yet. Instead, he walked the perimeter. Quiet. Observing. There were drawings taped to one wall. Dozens. Crayons, charcoal, pencil. Faces with no mouths. Figures behind windows. One sheet had only the word sorry repeated over and over in different sizes. The letters grew smaller near the bottom, fading like someone ran out of energy or hope. Another picture showed a man with 3 heads. Each wore a different expression. Kind, angry, gone. In the corner, a radio. Old, battery-powered. And beside it, a cassette tape labeled in red ink, Sunday Confession. Mason didn't touch it. Not yet. Ollie sat down, cross-legged on the mattress. His fingers fidgeted with the corner of the sheet. I don't always sleep here, he said quietly. Just when he hears the song. Mason crouched. The song. Ollie nodded. He says it was from before. From when he was a preacher. He looked up. When the song plays, he gets loud. Mason stayed quiet. The flashlight now rested between them, casting soft shadows on the boy's face. Sometimes, Ollie said, he talks to the bear instead of me. That's better. A long silence stretched. No one filled it. Mason reached into his coat, pulled out the sketch Ollie had given him earlier. The one with the 3 figures. He laid it on the mattress. Ollie looked at it, then away. Mason said, "Why did you draw that?" The boy shrugged. I wanted to remember what it felt like. What did it feel like? Ollie's voice trembled, like no one was pretending. Mason let that sit. Then, gently, has anyone else been here? Ollie shook his head. Just him, and me, and the bear. Mason added, almost like a joke. But Ollie didn't smile. He says the bear remembers everything. That if I forget, the bear will tell him. Mason stood. Looked around again. This wasn't a prison. It wasn't even a punishment, not in the conventional sense. It was something worse. It was a room built for forgetting. And Ollie, somehow, had remembered anyway. He turned to the cassette. Picked it up. It was cold. He slipped it into his pocket. Later, not here, beside the door a hook. Hanging on it a belt. Worn. Frayed. The whole stretched from use. Mason didn't touch that either. Instead, he walked back to the boy. Sat down beside him. Not to fix. Not to explain, just to be there. A soft clink echoed as Ollie pulled something from under the mattress. Timbo. He opened it. Inside, pebbles. Tiny ones. Smooth. Each marked with a number in Sharpie. Every time I made it through, Ollie said. I marked 1. Mason counted them. 17. I don't know what I'll do when I run out. Ollie whispered. Mason looked at him. You won't. The boy met his gaze. And for the first time, Mason saw something there. Not defiance. Not fear. Something smaller. But brighter. Faith. Not in the world. Not in adults. Not even in himself. But maybe, just maybe, in the fact that someone stayed. Above them, the house creaked. Rain had returned. Ollie leaned against Mason's arm. Not fully, just enough. And they sat there, in the room without echoes. Because, for once, no one had to raise their voice to be heard. The house above them began to stretch. You could hear it. Old beams adjusting, windows breathing out the night, rain tapping softer now against the roof like it had nothing urgent left to say. Mason rose first, not abruptly, not with the force of someone trying to fix things, just slowly, like someone remembering he had legs and they still worked. Ollie followed. He didn't ask where they were going. Maybe he already knew the answer was nowhere far. Just up, just out of that room. The door closed behind them with a click that felt too loud. Mason locked it again, the way you'd lock a memory you weren't done understanding. Then he dropped the key into his pocket, where it clinked faintly against the cassette. No one spoke on the way back upstairs. Ollie's bare feet made soft pads against the linoleum. His shoulders no longer hunched. They weren't proud yet, but they were no longer afraid of taking up space. Leon was gone from the kitchen. Only the smell of instant coffee lingered, burnt and thin. Mason checked the front door. It was unlocked. That was the first choice Leon had made that mattered. In the quiet that followed, Mason found the kettle, filled it, and set it on the stove. His movements weren't expert, but they were steady, measured, the kind a man makes when he's trying not to scare a dog or a kid. Ollie climbed into one of the kitchen chairs. He swung his legs slow, not aimless, like rhythm had returned to him. There was a scar on his shin, thin, white, older than last week, but not older than childhood. Mason glanced at it, didn't ask. He sat across from him, hands on the table, palms down. A loose beam of sunlight crept across the linoleum, inching toward Ollie's toes. He didn't flinch. "Do you like oatmeal?" Mason asked. Ollie shrugged, then nodded barely. "Got a packet in the truck," Mason said, rising. He stepped out into the cool air. His boots sank slightly into the wet grass. For a second, he stood still, breathing, letting the distance between who he was last night and who he was now settle. He wasn't a soldier here, not exactly, but the muscle memory of being one, of noticing the weight in a room, the silence in a hallway, the look in a child's eyes that remained. He grabbed the emergency food pack from behind the seat. It wasn't gourmet, but it was warm, and sometimes that was all that mattered. Back inside, Mason poured hot water into the cup, stirred the oatmeal until it thickened, slow and steady. Ollie watched without speaking. Then, out of nowhere, "Do you have a dog?" Mason blinked. "Used to. What happened?" Mason stirred once more, then placed the spoon down. He got old. "Let go." Ollie nodded like that made sense. "Murphy," he said. Mason tilted his head. "How'd you know? You smell like dog. Not the bad kind. The jacket kind." That made Mason smile, small, inward. He slid the bowl across. Ollie ate in silence. Every few seconds, he looked up, not afraid, just checking, to see if Mason was still there, still listening, still real. Outside, a mail truck drove past. Didn't stop. Didn't need to. Some houses don't receive letters anymore. But Mason, without realizing, made a note. "Call Claire." Just not yet. Not until there was something to say that didn't sound like a warning. Ollie pushed the empty bowl forward. He didn't thank him. Didn't need to. Mason stood, rinsed the dish, placed it upside down in the sink. Then he sat back down, same chair, same posture. There was something unspoken in the air between them, something like a pause. Ollie finally broke it. "Do you know about monsters?" Mason nodded. "I used to think they were under beds," the boy said. "But they're not. They're the ones who know your name." Mason didn't reply. Just let it sit. Ollie wasn't looking for comfort. He was naming something. And sometimes, that's the first step in taking its power away. They stayed like that for an hour. No cartoons. No screens. Just two people at a kitchen table, letting the day happen around them. At some point, Ollie got up, walked to the corner where a yellowed pad of paper lay near the fridge. He picked up a pencil, sat on the floor, and began to draw. Mason didn't watch directly, but from the angle of the boy's shoulders, he could tell it wasn't a monster this time. Maybe a dog. Maybe 3 people. Maybe a house that wasn't afraid of being filled. The day stretched. Leon didn't come back. Mason didn't call anyone. Not yet. Some rescues don't require sirens. Just chairs, warm food, and a silence that doesn't judge. By evening, the light outside had turned the color of washed denim. Ollie fell asleep curled on the couch, the drawing pad still clutched in one hand. Mason covered him with the army blanket from his truck, then sat by the window. He didn't look for movement outside, didn't brace for an attack. He just watched the dusk arrive like he'd been waiting for it. No commands, no mischins, just the quiet, and the boy breathing steadily in the background. The dusk leaned gently into night. No sharp edges, just a slow folding of light into shadows. The kind of dark that doesn't announce itself, it simply happens. Mason sat by the window, legs stretched out, boots still on. He hadn't meant to wait this long. But then again, he hadn't meant for any of this. The boy was asleep on the couch behind him, breath rising slow under the old blanket. One hand clutched the drawing pad. The other curled near his face like he'd paused mid-reach for something that only made sense in dreams. Mason hadn't looked at the drawing yet. He wouldn't. Not until morning. Some images aren't meant to be read by moonlight. The burner phone sat in his jacket pocket. He hadn't powered it on since the drive out. Not because he was hiding, but because silence sometimes answers better than the world ever does. Still, he reached for it now, lit warm in his palm, the small weight of decision. The boy's name, Ollie, had been enough to narrow it down. Missing persons reports, case files, newspaper clippings with dates that no longer held meaning. He'd traced it to a mother named Claire Rowan. Last known residence, a suburb 2 hours east. Occupation, nurse's aide. Status, single. No arrests. No complaints. Just absence. A silence so total. It made Mason question the noise of everything else. He turned the phone on. The screen flickered, blue, harsh. Then steady. No service for a few seconds. Then 2 bars. He scrolled past names he didn't recognize. Default contacts, leftover numbers from the burner's previous owner. Each one anonymous, cold. Then he typed in the number he'd written on the inside of a matchbox. Claire Rowan, mobile, 319. 505 ######. He didn't hit dial. Not right away. He stared at the digits, letting them settle into his body like the first step of a long march. Ollie stirred on the couch. A small sound. Not a word. Just a whimper caught between sleep and fear. Mason didn't move. Didn't hush him. Didn't reach out. He just stayed still, solid as a door someone might knock on. Then he called. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Each tone seemed louder than the last. On the 5th ring, a click. Silence. Then, hello. The voice was hoarse. Not from illness. From disuse. He didn't speak. She repeated. Hello. Mason cleared his throat. Is this Claire? Silence again. Yes, she said, cautious. Who's calling? My name's Mason Ward. Do I know you? No. Another pause. Almost told her the boy was safe. That he was asleep, on a couch not more than 6 feet from him. That his skin was unmarked, his voice intact, his breath steady. But Mason had seen war. He knew the danger of sudden truths. They told me to call you, he said instead. Who? Your son. The silence now was different. Not hesitation. Not fear. Something softer. Wounded. He's alive? She whispered. Yes. A pause. Are you sure? Mason turned to look at the boy. The outline of him under the blanket. The soft curve of his back. The edge of the drawing pad in his grip. I'm sure. The line stayed quiet for a long time. Mason didn't rush her. Claire finally spoke again, voice cracked open. I looked for him. I call hospitals. Foster homes. I filed reports. I know. I thought maybe he died. And they didn't tell me. No. Where is he? With me. For now. What does that mean? It means he's safe. But I need to understand something before anything else. She didn't push. Didn't plead. Just said, ask. Why was he with Leon Brody? The silence was sharp this time. A silence made of shame. Not confusion. I didn't give him up, she said, slowly. I didn't sell him. I didn't lose him. She took a breath. Leon was my brother. Mason blinked. That hadn't come up in the records. He helped when I was going through some things. He said he'd watch Ollie for the weekend. I needed rest. Just sleep. She swallowed hard. But when I came back, they were gone. No note. No voicemail. I didn't know where to begin. Cops said maybe I had misremembered. Maybe I'd been unstable. Were you? Yes. But not about him. Mason nodded slowly, though she couldn't see. I believe you. She let out a shaky breath. Is he okay? He's quiet. Observant. Smart. He counted pebbles to survive. I don't understand. You don't have to. Not yet. A longer silence. Then, soft. Can I talk to him? Not tonight. A pause. What? He's asleep. And when he wakes, I want the world he wakes into to be gentler than the one he left. She didn't argue. Mason continued. I'll bring him to you. Soon. But I need you to be ready. I am. No. I mean, ready in the way a field waits for spring. Not just wanting it. Needing it. Making space for it. The line went quiet again. I haven't been ready for a long time, she said. I know, but I want to be. That's enough. For now. She cleared her throat. When will you come? I'll call again tomorrow. Okay. Claire. Yes. He remembers your lullaby. The line shook then. Not audibly. But Mason could hear the breath catch. The years unravel. What did he say? He hums it. Not always. Just when he's drawing. She couldn't reply. So Mason let her go. He ended the call. The phone buzzed once after. An unsaved number, now stored in its memory. Claire Rowan. Saved. Not erased. The night deepened. He sat back down. The couch creaked slightly as Ollie shifted. Still asleep. Still holding on. Mason reached for the drawing pad. Finally. He lifted the top page. It wasn't a monster. Not a bear. Not 3 heads. Just a field. And in the field, a woman, arms open. A boy running. And, behind them, a figure watching. Not joining. Not interrupting. Just making sure they reached each other. Safely. The light came in slow, like it was learning how to be morning again. It touched the edges of the table first, then the chipped ceramic cup, then the boy. Ollie stirred beneath the blanket, not with a start, not with panic, just the small, instinctive shift of someone trying to remember where they were and who they could trust in the remembering. Mason had been up for hours. He hadn't done much, just sat. There were coffee grounds in the sink, 2 mugs on the counter. The radio hadn't been touched. The fridge hummed like a nervous witness. Outside, fog clung to the lower branches of the trees, as though the earth still hadn't decided whether to hide or be seen. He watched Ollie sit up. The boy's hair was matted on one side. He blinked slowly, rubbed his eyes, then looked around the room without urgency. That was the first change. No alarm, no immediate scan for exits. No flinch when Mason stood and walked toward the kitchen. Morning, Mason said, voice quiet, almost not there. Ollie nodded. Then, after a pause, morning, just that, 2 syllables that cracked open something larger than any story. Mason handed him a slice of toast dry. No butter in the fridge. But the warmth was enough. Ollie bit into it without looking at Mason. Still, he didn't look away in fear, just the way kids do when they're not ready to be watched yet. Sleep okay? Mason asked, pouring water into a chipped enamel cup. Another nod. I slept, Mason said. It wasn't a lie, and it wasn't the truth. After they ate, Mason sat back at the table. Ollie drifted toward the window, pressed his forehead against the glass. The outside world was soft with dew. A squirrel twitched its tail on the fence post. Somewhere, a lawnmower coughed to life. Normal sounds, but when you've been hiding, even normal feels like a kind of siren. Mason didn't interrupt. He let the boy take it in at his own pace. Ollie turned. Can I sit outside? Mason blinked. That was new. Sure. He opened the door for him. Held it. Not like a guard. Like someone remembering how to be kind. Ollie stepped out barefoot, gingerly. The porch wood creaked under him. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He sat, right there on the top step. The breeze played with the hem of his shirt. Mason sat inside, close enough to hear, far enough to not intrude. That's when the truth arrived. Not in words, not in confessions, but in the fact that the boy didn't ask for permission to stay. He already knew he could. Later, Mason brought out a small notebook and placed it beside Ollie. You draw, he said. It wasn't a question. Ollie looked at the notebook, then up at him. Then he opened to the first page and began sketching. Not with frantic strokes. Not with panic. Just steady. The way you do when something inside starts to let go. The drawing was simple. A tree. A figure beside it. No monsters. No calles. No screams scribbled in red. Just a small hand holding a larger one. He didn't say who they were. He didn't need to. Mason didn't ask. He just sat there. The way a hill sits behind a town. It doesn't move, but keeps everything in view. A few hours passed like that. Quiet. Undisturbed. At one point, Mason stood, disappeared into the house. Came back with an old army jacket. It was faded, soft at the edges. The kind of garment that had seen too many places and still held none of them. He handed it to Ollie. It's not cold, Ollie said. No, Mason replied. But you might want a pocket. Ollie put it on. It swallowed him. But he smiled. Not big. Not for show. Just enough that his cheek rose half an inch. And something behind his eyes flickered with heat. Around noon, Ollie spoke again. Did you ever get lost? Mason considered. Yeah. What did you do? Kept walking. Kept listening. Sometimes just sat down until the ground stopped spinning. Did anyone find you? Sometimes. Sometimes I had to find myself first. Ollie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then he pulled the hood of the jacket over his head and leaned against the porch post. The drawing rested on his lap. The wind flipped the page. He let it. Sometimes. What follows is quieter than what came before. And that's okay. The rest of the day passed in fragments. A sandwich shared. A nap taken in sunlight. A plastic ball found in the grass. Rolled between their feet without needing a game attached. Mason didn't call Claire again that day. Not yet. He wanted to let Ollie know the world wouldn't change again tomorrow. Not so soon. Not unless he was ready. And sometimes that meant waiting even when the road home was already mapped out. That night, Ollie didn't ask where to sleep. He simply went to the couch, pulled the blanket over himself, and mumbled something that might have been night or might have just been breath. Mason stayed by the window. The burner phone buzzed once. A text. Unknown number. Is he okay? He didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. Just respect for the silence. He looked toward the couch. The boy's form, rising and falling. He was okay. Not fixed, not whole, but okay. And for now, that was enough. Outside, the night deepened again. No sounds but the wind through pine needles. No movement but the breath of two people learning, slowly, how not to be afraid of tomorrow. And in the stillness between them, no speeches, no promises, no grand resolutions, just this. A boy, a soldier, and the truth neither of them had to say out loud. The next morning came with rain. Not a storm, just the steady, soft kind that makes everything outside look gentler, blurred at the edges. Mason liked mornings like this. He used to hate them. Wet boots, poor visibility, the weight of memory clinging like mist to his shoulders. But today, the weather felt like permission. Like maybe the world itself had slowed down enough for them to breathe inside it. Ollie didn't speak much at breakfast. He picked a toast, drank warm milk, then wandered to the window where condensation fogged the glass in soft circles. He drew a spiral with his finger, then another. Mason watched, not intruding. They'd stayed in the borrowed cabin longer than expected. He didn't even remember who the key had originally belonged to. A fellow veteran, a hunting buddy, maybe just someone who owed him a favor from a war neither of them could name cleanly anymore. He stood from the table and walked to the kitchen. Quiet footsteps, the kind that don't ask for attention. He packed without ceremony. 2 bottles of water, a blanket, 1 first aid kit, unopened, a small tin of peanut butter crackers. He moved like a man trained in retreat, not from fear, but from the understanding that some exits must be made gently. Ollie turned when the zipper closed. His eyes didn't widen. His shoulders didn't hunch. He just looked at the bag, then at Mason. Are we going somewhere? Yeah, Mason said. Somewhere quieter. Quieter than here. Mason smiled. There's a whole country quieter than here. Ollie nodded once. Like that made sense. Then, do I have to leave the jacket? No. The boy turned back to the window, pressed his palm against it. Rainwater streaked down the outside. His fingers left brief trails on the inside. Temporary maps. Roads going nowhere. He didn't ask where they were going. Only said, "Can I bring the drawing?" Of course. That was all. They moved like fog, without rush, without shape. The truck was old but faithful. The kind with rust beneath the wheel wells and a bench seat that always smelled like damp flannel no matter how long the sun stayed out. Mason let the heater run for a few minutes. Not to warm the cab, just to give Ollie space. The boy climbed in without hesitation. He held the drawing pad tight to his chest. The sleeves of Mason's jacket hung over his hands. Seatbelt clicked. That sound, that small mechanical click, felt like a kind of pact. They drove in silence for a while. The wipers beat a steady rhythm. Outside, the rain wasn't letting up, but the roads were mostly empty. No hurry in the world. Ollie stared out the window. Fields passed by, muddy now, the tall grass bent low. A scarecrow leaned crooked in a clearing, one arm missing. A line of cows stood motionless under a tree, their breath rising like ghosts. Mason didn't speak. Some truths are louder in silence. After an hour, they stopped. A diner, just off a forgotten stretch of highway. Neon light buzzed weakly in the window. Hot coffee. Real pie. Inside, it smelled like burnt toast and yesterday's stories. Mason ordered grilled cheese and soup for Ollie. Coffee for himself. They sat in a booth near the window. Ollie peeled the crusts off his sandwich with surgical precision. A waitress smiled at him once. He didn't flinch, just looked back. Mason noticed that. Another small miracle. On the way back to the truck, Ollie asked, "Is it far?" Mason shrugged. "Depend what you mean. The place we're going? Not too far." Ollie nodded again. That's all he needed. Sometimes the mind doesn't ask for destinations, just assurance that someone else is driving. By mid-afternoon, the clouds began to break. Just a little. A streak of light slashed across the sky, warming the horizon. Ollie shifted in his seat. "Can we stop soon?" "Yeah," Mason said. He knew a place. Not a home. Not yet. But a house. Set back behind a line of pine trees. Old siding. Porch swing held by only one chain. Windows that hadn't reflected laughter in a decade. Maybe more. It wasn't perfect, but it was far from harm. And sometimes distance is a kind of healing. They pulled into the gravel drive. Ollie looked around. "It's empty." Mason nodded. "That's why it's good." He shut the engine off. No more hum. No heater. No noise at all now, except the faint ticking of the cooling engine and the hush of wind through pine. Ollie didn't move at first. Just sat there, hands still gripping the sketchbook. Then, slowly, he opened the door. Mason didn't rush him. Let him step down. Let his feet crunch on gravel. Let his eyes take in a place that wasn't Leon's, wasn't the cabin, wasn't the kind of place you escaped from. Ollie walked up the steps. The porch creaked. He didn't flinch. He tried the door. It opened. No look. Mason followed. Inside, it was dust and silence. Faded wallpaper peeled at the corners. An old stove sat cold in the kitchen. One chair in the living room. That was it. But the windows let in golden light now. The rain had stopped. Ollie walked to the center of the room, spun slowly, then just as slowly sat down, cross-legged, like a kid again. Mason leaned against the doorframe. "This okay?" he asked. Ollie looked up. "It's quiet. That a good thing?" The boy shrugged. "I think so." Mason took that. He took it all, then walked over, sat on the floor beside him. They said nothing for a long while, but inside that nothing lived a truth, one that didn't need to be spoken. They were far from where they'd begun. Not home yet, but beyond fear. And for now, that was enough. The gravel popped under Mason's boots as he walked toward the mailbox. It was old, bent slightly forward like it was bowing to the weight of time. He opened it, empty, not unexpected. No one had lived in the house for years. Bills had stopped coming. The world had forgotten this address. He stood there a moment longer, hands in his pockets, eyes trailing down the long stretch of road. Pine to the left, dry field to the right, and a horizon that never told you what was coming. And that's when he saw her, a figure in the distance, too still to be passing through, too careful to be lost. She didn't wave, didn't shout. She just stood, holding a small canvas bag in both hands. The way someone might carry something fragile, or nothing at all. Mason didn't move. Not first, because recognition doesn't always come with lightning. Sometimes it comes quiet, the way a headache builds behind the eyes before you realize it's there. Claire, not the name he'd expected to call out again, not after the last time. Inside the house, Ollie was coloring. He had found a dull red crayon and was carefully filling in the roof of a small house drawn in shaky lines. The drawing was not of the place they were in, but of something remembered, something safe. A tree with no leaves, a dog without a face, a figure standing on the porch. Mason watched for a beat through the window. Then he stepped back outside, shutting the door behind him as gently as one might close a chapter too raw to read aloud. Claire didn't move, not even when he reached her. She was thinner than he remembered. Not in the way of vanity or illness, but in the way of someone who had spent too many nights curled into corners trying not to take up space. Her hair was pinned back, messily. Strands clung to her temples in the wind. The bag she carried had no logo, no shape, no meaning. Just fabric and fray. "Hi," she said. Mason didn't answer right away, just took in the sight of her. Not like an old flame, not like a ghost, just a fact, like weather, like gravity. "He's inside," Mason said. Claire's throat worked. Once, twice. She didn't speak. "Been here a couple days." He added. Still, she said nothing. Then, after a long silence, "Is he okay?" Better than before. Claire closed her eyes. When she opened them, she whispered, "I didn't know where else to go." "You came to the right place." That broke something, but she didn't cry. Not like in the movies. She just sat down on the roadside, knees drawn up, hands still clutching that empty bag. Mason didn't touch her. He just stood, a quiet sentry as the wind picked up. They didn't talk for 20 minutes. He sat beside her eventually. Not close, just nearby. And when she finally spoke, it came out slow, like something learned phonetically. "Leon told me he was safe, that the boy was better off with him, that he was getting help." Mason didn't respond. She turned slightly. "He lied, didn't he?" Mason gave a small nod. Claire exhaled, a sound that might have been a laugh, or a sob, or both. "He wouldn't let me see him," she said. "Said it'd confuse him, that I was unstable, that I'd ruin everything. And you believed him." "I wanted to," she said. It was easier than fighting. The air between them filled again with silence. But it wasn't cold, just full. At some point, Claire stood. She dusted off her jeans, adjusted her bag, and looked at the house. "I don't want to scare him." "You won't," Mason said. "He's drawing." That made her smile. Just a flicker, like a match lit in wind. "I don't expect him to forgive me. He doesn't need to, not yet. I just want to see him." Mason nodded once, then led the way. At the door, she paused. Her hands trembled just a little, not the kind of shaking that comes from fear, but from the weight of hope not dared. He opened the door. The air inside still held the warmth of early afternoon. Ollie looked up, saw Mason first, then her. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't freeze, but the crayon in his hand stopped moving. He blinked, then blinked again. Claire didn't step forward. She just whispered, "Hi, baby." And Ollie, still on the floor, still holding red in his fingers, whispered, "Hi." Just that, nothing more. But in that space, between his whisper and hers, the years folded in on themselves. And for a second, the world felt still again. Mason stepped back, left him there. He went to the porch, lit a match, let it burn down. He didn't listen in, didn't watch through the window. Some moments weren't his to witness. Some healing only happened when no one was trying to measure it. He stood there until the sun dipped low, until the light began to change, until silence became the only language anyone needed. And inside the house, Claire knelt slowly beside the boy she had once feared to hold. She didn't hug him, didn't touch him, just sat near, close enough for him to know she wasn't leaving this time, close enough for her to remember the weight of staying. And for now, that was all anyone asked. The yard behind the house sloped gently into a patch of dying grass, bordered by 3 pine trees and the bent remains of what used to be a clothesline pole. Rusted, forgotten, half swallowed by the earth. Mason stood there as the sky darkened. The horizon had turned copper, smudged with the color of rust and worn leather. The wind was quieter now, as if even it had nothing more to say. He held a small bundle, wrapped in an old towel. Nothing heavy, but each item inside seemed to pulse with weight anyway. A shirt, a letter, a photograph torn in two, and a lighter. He knelt by a circle of stones, left behind by someone else. Years ago, maybe kids, maybe another man, just like him, who thought he could burn something and be done with it. Mason didn't believe in symbolic acts. He didn't think fire cured things. But sometimes, letting go needed a ritual, even if only to feel like permission. The towel unfolded slow, one corner at a time. First, the shirt. Leon's shirt. Plaid. Washed too many times. Still carried the faint smell of aftershave and something sour underneath. Mason had found it in the trunk of the car, stuffed behind a box of tools. Kept, perhaps, in case he needed to look like someone's idea of dad again. Then the note. Folded small. Neat handwriting. No signature. He cries less now. Doesn't talk in his sleep anymore. I think he's finally settling in. Maybe I was right to take him. Mason didn't need more than that. Didn't want more. The letter didn't carry apology. Just justification. That was worse. He placed it on top of the shirt. Then the photo. Half of it. Claire and Ollie on a porch swing. Sunlight overexposed. A dog's tail caught mid-wag. The other half, Leon, smiling, was missing. Torn clean through the middle. He sat with the others. Arranged them like offerings. The wind shifted. Carried the faint scent of pine needles and distant wood smoke. He pulled the lighter from his pocket. Clicked it once. Flame. Then again. Nothing. Clicked. Flame. It caught on the corner of the note. Edges curled black. Lettering disappeared like secrets swallowed whole. The fire licked its way through the paper, then the fabric, then the photograph, soft crackle, then a sharp snap as the edge of the plastic coating gave in. Mason didn't move. He watched the way memory turned to ash without protest. The fire wasn't big. It didn't roar. Just glowed, soft and contained, enough to warm a hand, not enough to keep anyone alive. But maybe, tonight, that was all that was needed. Behind him, the house was quiet. Ollie had gone to bed early, after sitting by the window long enough to draw Claire's face with a pencil he kept too short to grip right. Claire hadn't spoken much after that. She'd made tea, held the cup, didn't drink, then sat on the porch with a blanket and her silence. Mason hadn't asked her to explain anything. Something sounded worse when said out loud. And besides, he'd already read enough in her eyes. The fire sank lower. Ash floated in small whirls. Mason added one last thing. His old dog tag. It was bent now, not from war, but from years of being shoved in the back of drawers and glove compartments. The chain had long since snapped. He placed it gently, like laying down a tired memory. The metal hissed in the flame. Then nothing. He stayed there as the night came in full. Not thinking, not naming feelings. Just there. Sometimes grief wasn't sob. It was a man sitting still as things burned. Knowing he wouldn't miss them, and also knowing they'd lived in his chest too long. Letting go is rarely sudden. It happens the way the fire dies. Slow, then slower, then, almost without notice, cold. When he finally stood, the fire was no more than red dust and soft glow. He used a stick to stir the remains. Nothing dramatic. No ceremonial words. Just a man making sure the past didn't catch wind and spark again. He picked up the towel, shook out the ash, folded it small, put it in his back pocket. Then he turned, back toward the house. Not hurried, not slow, just walking, like a man who'd spent enough time in the dark. Morning came quiet. It slipped under the door in long gold lines. Dust dancing in the beams like whispers from softer world. The house smelled of pine and faint old coffee. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe ticked. Claire woke first. She didn't know why. Habit, maybe, or the kind of sleep that stays close to waking, never quite letting you fall too deep. She sat up on the couch. Her blanket had slipped halfway off. Her neck ached. She hadn't meant to sleep there, but hadn't asked to be shown a bedroom either. Some returns are easier if you don't ask for more than you've earned. The house was still. Mason was likely out back. He rose early, always had. Something the army burned into the bones. And Ollie, her eyes searched the living room. No Ollie, but on the small kitchen table, next to a cup of dry pens and a dented flashlight, sat a folded piece of paper. Heavy stock, like it came from the back of a drawer. Used for something more important once. Now it was a canvas. She didn't move toward it right away. She just watched it from across the room, as if it might disappear if she stepped too fast. Eventually, barefoot and slow, she crossed the floor. Each board creaked different, like they were testing her. At the table, she pulled out the chair, sat down, took a breath, then unfolded the paper. It wasn't what she expected. Not at all. No figures. A window too high to reach. A door with 5 locks. He'd drawn each one. A bed, low and crooked, with a blanket that looked more like a net. Or bars. And in the corner, something small. A bowl. Empty. Claire's hand pressed against her chest. She didn't cry. Her eyes blurred, yes. But no tears fell. Because the thing that struck her most wasn't what was drawn. It was what wasn't. No color. Only pencil. Harsh lines pressed too hard. No toys. No light. No one else in the picture. And no version of him. Not even a silhouette. Just a room with a memory. He hadn't drawn himself inside it. But everything screamed that he had been. Claire stared at the paper. It looked like it had been folded and unfolded many times. The creases were deep. One edge torn. Like he'd started to rip it once, then changed his mind. She turned it over. One line of text, written in crooked letters. I don't go back here. Not can't. Not don't want to. Just don't. A quiet rule he made for himself. A border not to be crossed. She folded the paper again. Smaller this time. Tighter. But she didn't put it away. Didn't hide it or toss it or ask anyone why. She just held it. Palmed it like a fragile truth. Mason came in through the back door not long after. Boots dusty. Hair still wet from the creek behind the trees. He paused when he saw her. Didn't speak. She didn't look up. But her voice was steady when she said, "He remembers it all." Mason nodded. Yeah. Claire traced the edge of the paper with one finger. I thought maybe kids forget. Or it blurs. Not the important stuff. She breathed through her nose. Set the drawing down gently. I want to ask him, she said. Mason raised a brow. Not about what happened, she added, but about what he wants to happen now. He waited. She went on. If I push, I'll break something. Maybe I already did. But if I don't ask, if I just stand around hoping, he might think I won't stay. Mason leaned against the counter, crossed his arms. That's the hard part, he said finally. Staying. I know. You sure? Claire nodded. Mason watched her for a long moment, then turned toward the hallway. He's in the room with the red curtains. And with that, he left her there. She didn't rush. She picked up the drawing again, held it against her chest, then walked slowly down the hall, each step deliberate, each floorboard a reminder. This house held more than weight. It held choices. At the door, she knocked. Soft. Once. Then again. No answer. She opened it. Inside, Ollie sat on the floor, surrounded by crayons. The red ones were down to stubs. Blue was untouched. Black used up. He didn't look at her. She didn't step in. Just stood in the doorway. I saw your drawing, she said. He didn't move. I won't ask about it. I just wanted you to know I saw it. Still nothing. Claire smiled small, aching. I don't want to go back there either. At that, his hand paused. The crayon stopped. He looked up, met her eyes, and said, in a voice smaller than the page he'd drawn on, okay. She stepped inside, sat against the opposite wall, not near him, just with him, and they drew in silence. Not the past, not pain, just shapes, just color, just now. Mason didn't wake with a mission. There was no list, no schedule, no one waiting for him to get things done. But the sun had broken low over the hills, warm and honest. And something about the air smelled like old nails and second chances. So he went to the shed. The door groaned open. A pair of work gloves hung from a nail. Dust clung to their fingers like time itself had forgotten to let go. He took them, beside a pile of broken rakes and a mower that hadn't started since '09. He found a hammer and a box of mismatched nails. Most were bent. Some rusted clean through. He gathered them anyway. Behind the house, the fence leaned. It wasn't falling, but it wasn't standing proud either. Half the slats were loose. One had split at the bottom, and the western corner had completely given up, bowed like an old man in the wind. He stood there for a while, not thinking, just looking. Then he began. First, gloves on. Second, sleeve rolled. Third, breath deep. The first nail bent on the first swing. He didn't curse, didn't mutter, just pulled it out and tried again. There was something familiar about the rhythm. Set, swing, set again, like rifle drill, like checking perimeter, like the kind of work that tells your muscles you're still needed. Hours passed without him noticing. The sun climbed and dipped. Shadows shifted like memories trying to get comfortable. From time to time, he paused, not to rest, but to notice the way the breeze caught the trees, the way the soil smelled when he knelt by it, the way the fence, despite everything, still held together once he gave it care. It reminded him of men he'd served with, bent, bruised, but not broken, just waiting for someone to say, "You're worth fixing." He reached the corner post around noon. The worst part, the whole section sagged, 3 slats missing. The anchor post had rotted at the base. He crouched down, fingers tracing the old wood. Could have torn it out, started fresh, but something in him resisted the clean slate. He didn't want new. He wanted mended. So he dug around the post, braced it with leftover bricks, reinforced the base with a piece of board he cut by hand with a hacksaw he found in a drawer filled with spider webs. It wasn't pretty, but it held, and that was enough. When he stepped back, sweat clung to his neck. Dirt crusted on his knees. His hands ached, not from the work, but from how good it felt to hurt for something that stayed hurt, not something that bled and disappeared in sand. He looked at the fence, still crooked, still old, but solid, whole in its way, a little like him. From the kitchen window, Claire watched. She hadn't meant to. She'd gone to rinse a cup, and there he was, alone, focused, gentle with the wood, like it might speak back if he pressed too hard. She didn't call out, didn't wave, but something in her chest shifted. A click, a recognition, not of romance, not yet, but of trust, of the kind of man who didn't need thanks to do something right. Inside the house, Ollie sat by the couch. He was drawing again, this time a fence, but not the one he remembered. This one was straight, painted red, and beside it not a house, not a face, just 2 hands, holding a hammer, building. The afternoon stretched like a warm exhale. Not hot, not heavy, just soft around the edges, like the day had decided to lower its voice and let people rest. Inside the house, nothing urgent happened. No sudden cries, no broken dishes, no raised voices, just silence, good silence. The kind that filled the corners, not because people were angry, but because no one felt the need to speak. Claire sat by the window, a book open in her lap, but untouched. Her eyes kept wandering, not looking for danger, but watching. The way the curtains moved in rhythm with the breeze. The way dust glinted when it caught the light right. Across the room, Ollie was on the rug. He wasn't under a table, wasn't by the door. He'd picked the rug himself, plopped down with the casual confidence of someone who didn't need to flee in the next 5 seconds. And in his hands, a single toy car. Nothing fancy. Just a little blue one Mason had found in the shed. Its paint chipped, one wheel stiff. But Ollie loved it like it had always been his. He pushed it forward, slow and steady, then back. The wheels squeaked every few inches. But he didn't flinch. Didn't look around like someone might yell about the noise. He just played. Mason passed through the room once. Boots off. Shirt stained with fence dust. He gave Ollie a small nod. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing to draw attention. Just enough to say, "I see you." Then he kept walking. Ollie didn't stop playing. That was the miracle. Claire finally closed her book. Didn't mark the page. She hadn't read a word. She just smiled to herself. A smile with no teeth. No need to show anything. Just the kind that slips out when you realize something rare is happening, and you're lucky enough to be there for it. She got up quietly and went to the kitchen. Ollie didn't follow. Didn't ask where she was going. Didn't stiffen at her movement. The freedom of that tore something inside her. She filled a glass with water, not realizing her hands were shaking a little. Because when your child doesn't panic at your absence, it means they believe you'll return, that they're allowed to stay. Outside, wind moved through the tall grass. The fence Mason fixed stood with quiet dignity, still old, still not perfect, but upright. A bird landed on it for a moment, then flew off again. The afternoon deepened. Time moved the way it should, unnoticed. Claire made sandwiches for dinner. Nothing fancy, just turkey and bread, a little mustard. But she made 3. When she set the plate down near Ollie, she didn't say anything. He looked up, nodded, and took one. No begging, no checking for poison, no counting bites like they were rations. He just ate, like a child, like someone home. Later, when the lights started to go golden and long, Mason returned from wherever he'd gone after the fence. He washed his hands, sat at the edge of the couch. Ollie sat across from him. Neither said much. Claire brought 2 more glasses of water. They drank like neighbors who'd known each other for years, even if they barely knew each other at all. Dusk came gently. No alarms. No rush to lock doors. Claire closed the windows one by one, not because she was afraid, but because the air was getting cooler. Ollie gathered his crayons into a box, stacking them carefully by size. No one had asked him to. Mason stood by the back door for a long time, arms crossed, just watching the sky change. He didn't look like a soldier tonight. Just a man with dust on his boots and something quiet in his eyes. Before bed, Claire bent down and asked Ollie, "Do you want the light on or off?" He thought for a long time, then said off. Maybe leave the door open a little. She kissed his head. Okay. When she stepped out of the room, Mason was in the hallway. He didn't say anything. She didn't either, but they both paused there, in the hush between rooms, between past and future. And in that pause, a truth settled in. This might not be home yet, but it wasn't a place to run from anymore. Not tonight. Not this afternoon. Not with the door slightly open and the lights off by choice. Claire didn't find the letter right away. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that comes and goes without fanfare. She'd been changing the pillowcases, soft cotton ones with little faded stars on them, when her hand brushed something crinkled, tucked deep beneath Ollie's pillow. At first, she thought it was trash. Kids sometimes hoarded wrappers or notes or things they meant to throw away, but didn't. But this was folded carefully, like it had been placed with intention. She unfolded it slow. Edges softened from handling. One crease already starting to split. And inside, blocky letters, uneven, leaning into the lines, written in pencil that had been erased and rewritten more than once. No name, no date, just this. Thank you for not asking me what happened. Thank you for not yelling when I dropped the glass. Thank you for fixing the fence. Thank you for the sandwich. Thank you for letting me sit by the window. Thank you for letting the light be off. Thank you for not looking scared of me. I didn't know people like you still existed. I hope I can be like that too. Not sure who to give this to. Maybe no one. Maybe everyone. Claire didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat there on the edge of the bed, letter in her lap. Sunlight catching the curve of her cheekbone, making her look older and softer at once. It wasn't the words exactly. It was what they didn't say, what they left behind. The things that had happened, somehow not needing to be named anymore. Because thank you had replaced what happened to me. Because I hope had replaced I'm scared I'll never heal. She folded the letter again, but not along the old creases. She made new ones, gentle, careful, placed it inside her own journal, between 2 pages she hadn't written on yet. Not to keep it hidden, not to hoard it, but to remind herself that healing didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it came in handwriting slightly too big for the lines. Sometimes it didn't come with confessions or dramatic turning points. Sometimes it was just a child saying thank you and meaning it. That evening, she watched Ollie as he lay on the couch, legs tucked under him, a blanket draped haphazardly. He was humming, just barely, a tune with no name. And Mason? He sat by the door, polishing an old pair of boots, not because he had to, just because some habits brought peace. He looked up, met her gaze across the room, didn't say anything, but she knew. He hadn't read the letter, probably never would, didn't need to. Some people don't ask for thanks, and maybe that's why they're the ones who deserve it most. Later, after Ollie went to sleep and the house had gone quiet again, Claire returned to her journal, opened it to the page where the letter rested, and under it wrote 2 words. We stay. No puntuación. No explanación. Just that. Because in the end, we stay is harder than we fight, more radical than we flee, and softer than both. But it's what mattered. It's what healed, and it's what they were all learning to do. Together. a boy humming a song he didn't know he remembered, and a man, once trained to break, learning slowly how to stay. This wasn't about saving the world. It was about fixing one slat of wood, passing a sandwich across a table, leaving the light off because someone asked and you listened. It was about healing in the softest way, without demand, without applause. Only the kind of healing that stays long after people forget what hurt in the first place. Not perfect, but enough. And maybe that's the kind of story we all need sometimes. If something in this story lingered with you, even if it was just one sentence, one breath, one moment of silence, you're welcome to leave a thought below. Not for likes, not for noise. Just to say, I was here. I felt this too. Sometimes that's all we need. Someone quietly staying with the story. After the story ends,